All right, so I'm going to hit that. And now a new tab of my browser opens up, and here is my first Python notebook. And this basic interface is where you will be writing all of the Python code that's part of this course. And if you become a Jupyter Notebook developer, is where you will spend a lot of your time. It's here that sort of piece by piece in these sort of cells that you can see in the middle of the page, one by one, that you gradually build a stack of Python code that from top to bottom executes the analysis that you're conducting. And when you're done, if you tidy it up very nice and polish things well, they can look a lot like a sort of interactive white paper or scientific paper that reproduces the results of an analysis and annotates it as it goes. But that's a ways off. We're just beginning. Let's start off with something very simple. So it's here within this first cell, within the green box, there's another box, and there's where you write your Python code. And if you've never done it before, maybe this is a little intimidating, but don't let it be. At its core, computer programming is really very simple interactions between numbers, character strings, functions that manipulate them, and third-party libraries that you might import that kind of make stuff happen. But a lot of it is really very simple. So even very basic math is included with all this. So for instance, here with Python, I could simply type 2 space plus 2, and this will be our first Python code, 2 plus 2. And then inside the notebook, you can see that there's a play button right here in the middle of the page. And this will execute the current cell of code that is selected as signaled by the green box. And so if I make sure I've clicked on this 2 and it's selected, and I hit the play button, it will then run that line of code, and it will then spit out the number 4, because of course 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? And down in the next box, I could say do 2 plus 3, and then I could hit the play button, and it will create a third box that's empty to write in, and it will write out the results of the cell that I've just run. 2 plus 3 equals 5. Now, it's within this sort of space and in these boxes that you begin to write more and more complex Python code to do what you want to do. And, you know, obviously I can't cover everything in Python in this video, but just to show some of the basics, you know, one thing you're commonly doing is storing your values and data within variables, within names that you create that can be reused. So I'm going to create a variable called number. And I'm going to say number equals 2, right? And then I'm going to hit play. And since all it's doing is storing a number inside the variable number, nothing happens. There's no output. It just runs and moves to the next one. But now if I do something simple like number plus number, and I hit enter, it says 4, because the number 2 is stored in that variable, and I've added it against itself, and the result of 2 plus 2 is of course 4. There's all sorts of other math you could do in Python. We could do number times 10 and hit play, and now we have 2 times 10 equals 20. Or we could do number plus number plus 5, right? And begin to chain these operations together, and that will give us 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 5 is 9. And one of the things that's really great about the notebook is that you have this sort of auditable trail of all your code that's been developed kind of as you go. So you don't lose any of it. It's all there. We're saving it into this file that we've created on our desktop, which we can do now by just hitting the save button to make sure everything's saved. And then that becomes something we could share with other people and ultimately publish. Also, if we revise code that we've written higher up in the stack, we can then rerun the code below it, and all of our changes will ripple through from the top to the bottom. So to show just like a very basic example, if I move higher up in my notebook here, and I change the number 2 to the number 5, right? And then I go to the cell pull-down menu at the very top, and in here, there's some handy utilities. One that you'll find yourself using a lot is run all, which will just run all of the cells in the notebook from the top again. Now, but this time, instead of number equaling 2, number will equal 5. So all the cells rerun from top to bottom. Number equals 5. And this time, number plus number now, of course, equals 10. Number times 10, 5 times 10, of course, equals 50. And number plus 5 is now 5 plus 5 plus 5 equals 15. And it's just by constantly going back and revising and circling over again things you've done that inside the notebook you can gradually develop a pretty sophisticated data analysis that has a breadcrumb trail back to where it began. And that's one of the huge reasons this has become so popular within the sciences and in the media, is because there's a big hunger, one, to make these complicated scripts simpler and easier to write with less work, but also to make them reproducible so that you can prove your results are valid to other people, right? And I love them just because I can then go back and also check my work and just make sure I didn't make a mistake and be very careful about my code and have it all in one sort of well-organized script. Now you can give your notebook a title by going up to the top. You see it starts off being called Untitled. I could click there and I could give it a name. And I don't know, what should we call this? I might call this My First Notebook, right, with hyphens in between, and then hit rename. Now if I hit the save disk here, that'll then save that file, right? I can go back to my home tab here on the left, and I can see, wow, there's my first notebook has now been saved into that folder structure that we see within the browser. And if I go finally back to my terminal, I can see that here in my terminal the notebook has been running, and every time I've been saving or doing things, it's been kind of registering some action here. That's because my terminal is running a server, sort of like a little private website that exists only on my laptop, from which the Jupyter Notebook is generated. And so the notebook in the web browser, which if you look carefully is at an odd address called localhost, and localhost again is just sort of computer programming jargon for your local computer. But as long as this terminal here is running with this kind of stuff happening in there, the server is up, and these web addresses will continue to work. But if I'd like to return to my terminal and maybe install some other Python tools, I'm going to need to stop the Jupyter Notebook so that I can do what I need to do before restarting it. And so one key thing to know about a notebook is how, once the server is up, how do you stop it? And it's not that complicated. You just click in the terminal, and you can hit Control-C as a key combination. Control-C will then trigger a little question mark here that says, do you want to shut down the server, yes or no, Y or N? I'm going to hit Y because yes, I want to. And so now the notebook has shut down, as it's told me, and I am back on the terminal where I was before. And if I type ls, which again will list everything in my folders, I can see that there's now a file here called My First Python Notebook, right? So I've created the file in the browser application and saved it, and it now exists on the disk of my computer like any other file. But because I've stopped the server, if I go back to my browser and I try to access that file, I'm going to get an error. And that's because the localhost address on my machine, which was running after I had typed Jupyter Notebook, is now no longer running because I hit Control-C and killed it. And so to get back into my file, which I'm no longer able to access, I'll need to restart the server, which again I can type in by saying Jupyter space notebook, enter. We'll then reboot that server, and then my browser will reopen, and I'll be able to reopen and begin editing my notebook again. And this to and fro of starting and stopping your server, depending on what you need to do, is kind of part of becoming a Jupyter Notebook developer, and you just need to always kind of keep in mind where is the server running, which terminal, and then connecting that between that and your browser and whatever else you might want to do. That's all I have. Congratulations, you've installed Jupyter Notebook within your virtual environment and written your first Python code within its interactive system. We're going to cover a lot more in the future lessons, and we're going to do things that are a lot more sophisticated, but you've just got the fundamentals down. So I'd encourage you now at this point to maybe experiment a little bit, try to write some math of your own or some basic Python if you know any within the notebook, and see if you can get it to play and add new cells and just goof around a little bit before we move on to the next lesson. All right, thank you.